Perfect. All right. Well, let's just jump right in. Tonight we're going to talk about credit. And when we talk about credit, I'm going to kind of start off with some of the basics, kind of where credit comes from. And then we're going to kind of move into credit scoring, what comprises the credit score. Then we're going to move into tips, things that you can do to actually make sure that your credit score is as great as it can be. So let me go ahead and see here. I'm having an issue with. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay. So first of all, I'm just going to introduce my company, Zactus, and who we are. How do we fit into all this? So Zactus, we primarily only work with mortgage companies, banks, and credit unions on the lending side. We don't go out to the consumers at all. Normally, a consumer will come to us indirectly through a mortgage company. But what our role is we take the data from all three national repositories, Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. We merge them into one format, one credit report that lenders can use to make mortgage loans. And that when we put that format together, that can be sold on the secondary market by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, packaging those mortgage-backed securities that you hear a lot about in the news. So that's kind of our role. We're aggregating that data. We also provide different verification services like verification of employment, tax transcripts, lien and judgments. And then with all that, we're there to support the client. So when Tidewater Home Funding has a client that comes in and needs a mortgage, and let's just say there's something wrong with the credit report or there's something that needs to be corrected, we jump in and then we assist them in getting it corrected for the consumers at the bureau level, either help the credit score or just to help underwriting if there's something that just needs to be taken off the credit report. So that's our role in the process. We also do provide education. We primarily educate throughout the mortgage industry. So loan officers and processing and underwriting teams kind of know what's going on with credit scoring, and they have the latest and greatest information. Everything we do is governed by the FCRA, which is the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Okay, so that's who we are. Now to jump right into credit scoring. Really, what I want to answer today for you is, what is a credit score? Where does it come from? And more importantly, how can you improve your score or make sure that you have the highest score possible? And one thing I want to make sure everybody understands is that just like on your phone, when you have different versions of software or on your computer, the same is true with credit scores. There are many different models that are in use, and different lenders look for different things. So, Capital One has a model that they're looking at when they're trying to give you a credit card. Auto loans, they look at something else possibly. And then the mortgage industry, we look at something that and I'll get into it a little bit later on, but our scores are the most strict in the industry. So what happens is a lot of times as a consumer, you can go on and get your free consumer copy of the credit score, but that may not be what your lender's going to see because we're all using different versions of the score. I'll get into that a little bit more detail later on in the presentation. I also want to let everybody know there's two kinds of inquiries. That is, number one is a hard inquiry, and that is when you come out to a lender and say, "Hey, I want to establish credit. I want to apply for a car, a mortgage, a credit card." That's a hard inquiry. You're actually trying to get credit. There's also soft inquiries, and those are when either you as a consumer check your credit score, or somebody that you currently have a relationship with goes in and checks your credit score. And one thing that's interesting is I have a Capital One card. And what happens is Capital One about 3 times a year will go in and pull my credit, and they'll look at it and make sure, okay, yeah, Dave, he's doing okay. And if I'm doing okay and they like what they see, they may increase my credit limit. Or if they see that I'm getting into trouble and my scores drop from when they originally gave me the card, they may say, "Hey, you know what? We're gonna lower his limit, or we're not gonna do anything here because his score has dropped." So your current vendors are always in there monitoring your credit and looking at things for you. There will be changes coming late this year and into 2025. I'll touch on those at the end that are very important things for you to know about so that you can plan accordingly and make sure you're doing all the right things to make sure your credit score in the newer models is as high as possible. So the basics here. So all the data, consumer data from the 3 bureaus resides at these 3 companies, and it's Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. And, years ago, they were geography kind of really dictated which one got the most information. You had Equifax was very strong on the East Coast, You had Experian, very strong in the middle part of the country, like Texas and that area. And then you had TransUnion, very strong out west. And what happened was, 30 years ago, if you lived on the East Coast, well, maybe all your creditors just reported to Equifax. And then if you moved to California, you may not even have a credit score or a credit report information over there. Well, as time has gone on, it's kind of all blended together. So now about 98% of all creditors do actually report to all three, but you still have cases where maybe a creditor only reports to one. And that's why when you're going out trying to establish credit and you go to a bank or a credit union to get a credit card, you want to make sure that they're reporting to all three bureaus so that you have three good scores. The thing that's interesting about the three repositories, they are competitors. They do not share information with each other. They're their own silos. And what that means is, from a practical point, is that if you're Capital One and you send all your data in, even if you send everything today to all three bureaus, well, they may not report it at the same time. So, Equifax may take the data and they may update your credit report tomorrow. TransUnion may wait till after the holiday and report it next Tuesday, and Experian may report it sometime over the weekend. So the reason why that's important to know is that just because you do an action or just because an action is taken, it may update in different periods of time. They also all keep different reporting dates. So, when you're trying to model out your credit, you definitely keep that in mind. Just because you do an action doesn't mean it's going to immediately take effect. And the converse is true too. If you have something negative, it may not show up on one of the bureaus for another 20 or 30 days. So just important to know kind of how that all works. See here. So what is a credit score? In the mortgage world, what a credit score is designed to do is to predict whether the applicant will have a 90-day late payment at any point in the next 2 years. So that's what it's trying to predict. And how it does that is it uses a scorecard. And it's kind of like when you were in school and the teacher says, hey, we're going to have a grade, your grade's going to be comprised of all these different tests and quizzes, and we're going to rank them all as percentages. Well, same is true with your credit score. And I'll go through all the items that make up that credit score. But the important thing to know is that, that's what goes into your credit score. And it's designed to where the higher the number, the lower the likelihood that you'll have a 90-day late payment in the next 24 months. So this slide here is talking about derogatory information and how long it can stay on your credit report. Anything good, positive information can stay on your credit report indefinitely. There's no limits to that. So you never have to worry about anything that's good on your credit report because it's only going to help you. But if there's anything derogatory, late payment, collection, judgment, anything like that, then immediately, because it's derogatory, it falls under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So then what happens is now laws and rules come into play that are mandated by the federal government. So it's across the nation, doesn't matter about state rules. It's federally mandated. So now, okay, we have to abide by these. The creditors have to abide by these, and the bureaus have to abide. And what that means is that if something is put on your credit report that's derogatory, it can only stay on for 7 years, unless it's a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, in which case it can stay on for 10 years. So that's important to know, because a lot of times people, maybe they had a hard time, 6.5 years ago, and now they want to buy a house. And they know, okay, well, in 6 months, hey, all this derogatory information is going to fall off my credit report, and I should be in a good spot to buy a house or do whatever I want to do. So important to know those timelines. And the mortgage companies are very in sync with that. So they'll work with somebody that's in that situation and say, hey, yeah, if we can wait 2 more months or 3 more months, these will fall off. And then they pull the credit and they check. And if they haven't, then there are mechanisms for us to do to get them off. But again, because it's a mandated federal law, they're normally pretty good about getting those off when they need to be. So what's not on the credit report? What the credit scores don't care about? All those items up on the screen have no impact whatsoever on your credit score. The last item, the interest rate, sometimes that throws people for a little bit of a loop, and they say, wait a minute, how is that? Well, the reality is the data that's coming in, the bureaus don't even know what your interest rate is. So it never gets reported. So you could have a 0% interest, or you could have the maximum at 25 or 28%, depending on your state you're in, and doesn't matter. So that's never, ever factored in. Employment status, all those items have nothing to do with the credit score. So I mentioned earlier about different scoring models, just like computer software. All kinds of different ones are out there, and the score differences can be up to 200 points. You can pull my credit report today, exact same data, and you're going to get a huge swing depending on which models you're using. And how this can be very confusing for consumers is that, they may say, hey, you know what? Yeah, I'm renting my apartment and I want to buy a house probably later on this fall. And I checked my credit score and I'm looking pretty good. I went on to, one of those sites, Credit Karma or whatever the case may be, and I look really good. And then what happens is they kind of plan for that. And then they go to a lender and the lender pulls their credit score and it's completely different. It's lower than what typically than what they thought it was. And then now they're worried about, oh my gosh, am I going to get the best rate? Am I going to qualify? So that's why it's important to know, okay, yeah, we're dealing with different scoring models, because a lot of times it causes confusion with the borrower and they may say, wait a minute, I thought I had an 800 credit score. You're telling me I have 650. You don't know what you're doing, and let me go somewhere else. And a lot of times it can cause a lot of confusion for borrowers, or the worst thing that can happen is the borrower gets frustrated and says, you know what, maybe I shouldn't get a house, or maybe I shouldn't do what I'm trying to do here. And then they don't act when they could have gone and worked with the mortgage lender to try to increase their credit score. So very important to have that education and let people know, that there are different models. And if the model isn't where it needs to be as far as your credit score, there are ways that lenders can help out and help get that credit score to where it needs to be. So this here's my favorite slide. And this talks about the odds of a good payer to a bad. And this is no different than if somebody goes to Las Vegas or Atlantic City and wants to bet on sports or whatever the case may be. It's all about the odds. And when these investors have these big pools of money, they sit there and they say, hey, you know what? We're comfortable with certain level of risk. And they know, based on millions of files over the years, they can say, you know what? We know that if we loan out money for an 800 credit score or higher, we know we're going to have to do 1,292 loans before we have one that comes back on us. Conversely, if we loan below 620, we know that we have to, 8 to 1 is that ratio. So we're not comfortable with that. And what happens is these lenders pick these different tiers. And you'll see this at the car dealership too. They do the same thing. And they'll say, you know what, 740 or 680 or whatever the number is, that's what we're comfortable with, and that's where our risk tolerance is. So the great thing about that is you kind of know, okay, this is where we need to be. But the crazy thing about that is that the cutoff 680 and you're at 679, well, that could be a showstopper. You may not get the program you want, or you may get the program, but then they're going to bump up the rate on you because you fall into this different tier, which is why we're going to now move into how do you make sure you're getting every point possible, especially if you're just a couple points away from the tier that you need to be. So that's kind of how the investment game works and what they're looking at, and why you see these, crazy numbers, like you go into auto dealership and they need everybody, 740 to get the best rate, or 780. This is where all that comes from. So the models that they use to grade everybody, they're proprietary. They don't actually go out and say, hey, here's our exact grading system. But they do give general guidelines. And our industry, Xactus, along with our competitors, we have done enough reverse engineering to where we know pretty much with 99% accuracy that, okay, if a consumer needs to get 8 points to get them to a new tier, here's what they need to do. And Tidewater Home Funding and all the partners have access to those tools where they can sit down with the borrower and say, hey, yeah, do these 3 things and we'll get you where you need to be. So there are tools that can help borrowers, and a lot of consumers can go on to like Credit Karma and look at those models and say, hey, what if I pay my credit card down to 0 this month? How will that impact me? That type of stuff. But the problem with the scores is that they only use the raw data that they have. So if something's wrong on your credit file, then it's not going to do you much good, because that's going to, keep your score down lower than it should be. So we're going to talk about how to help out in those situations in a minute. But we're going to jump right in now to the pie chart here, which is the percentages of what everything counts. And the biggest piece here, the past payment history at 35%. And then the balances are at 30, credit history at 15, and then types of credit in use and inquiries are each 10%. And we're going to go through each one of these. So the payment history, and this is the biggest piece, this is very simple. If you pay all your bills on time, you can do great in this category. And this is, all about just, are you paying when it's due and on time? Now, let's say you don't. Let's say there's a problem when you've had a late payment, or you've had some kind of derogatory collection or something. Well, what's going to happen is you're going to get hit really hard for that first 6 months. And then over time, it's going to start to heal itself. It's kind of like, think of a fire. The further you move away from that fire, the less you're going to feel the heat. Same is true in the credit world. So, let's just say you had a 800 credit score and you had your first late payment. So now you've lost 100 points. So now you're at 700. You can lose that 100 points for that first 6 months. But then after 6 months, it's going to start to heal itself to where maybe now you're only down 80 points where you should be. And then at 24 months, that's a critical time in the credit world where once you're outside of 2 years, it's really going to drop down to where maybe now you're only being penalized, 25 or 30 points. And then it'll just ride all the way out till it falls off at 7 years. So it's very important to know that, okay, again, these timelines are, maybe my credit score will increase after I wait another couple months because I get to a different tier there. Another thing that's important about this is, the model, they're only getting this data from the Bureau. So, it's not like we're thinking things through here. It's all about if-then statements. So what happens sometimes is somebody gets, let's say they have a collection and the collection's been minding its own business. 3 years it's been sitting there, so it's not really hit that hard. It's aged out a little bit. And let's say this person decides, hey, you know what? I want to go buy a house. So, but, before I do, maybe I should go and call that collection company, or I should call this creditor, and maybe I should stir things up a little bit by paying it. Well, a lot of times that could be the worst thing to do, because what happens is you go into that creditor who it's a derogatory account and you start, making a payment arrangement, or you say, I'll pay you $5 a month, or whatever the case may be. And then they then recategorize you. So instead of having it aged out over 24 months, they now have a new derogatory on you less than 6 months old. So your credit score can actually go down. So the point of me saying that is that sometimes this is counterintuitive. Like, you think you should pay it and satisfy something, but maybe you shouldn't, or maybe you should talk to a loan officer or condition for something to be paid at closing or something before you do anything. And the reason why I say all that is so many times people go in and start doing things and they don't understand the consequences. So by having somebody, a professional, pull your credit report and go through it with you, they're going to tell you, hey, don't do this, or yeah, go ahead and do it. That's fine. Or we'll do it later on in the process before we've already locked our loan and we've got you ready to get a house here. So there's a lot of different ways to manage a problem, but it's all about having the right education and information. So we'll go to the next piece here, the balances. So this is 30%. It's a big chunk. And what happens is, so mortgages, car loans, student loans, you just pay those normally, like whatever the monthly payment is. You don't need to really worry about anything there. Those loans are designed to just have the balance very slowly go down over time. No problem there. But where the balances come into play are on revolving charge cards. And that's where you get into, okay, I have a $5,000 limit on my credit card, let's just say. And if I'm zero, then okay, that's great. But as I start to put more and more money on that card each month, my score is going to start to drop, because there's different percentages. There's 30%, you'll start to see a drop, 50%. When you're 70% used, you're going to take another hit. And then when you're maxed out or over 100% of the balance, and depending, which can happen with interest and stuff like that, you're really going to get hammered. So what you want to make sure is that you keep those balances low and you keep them all under the 30%. And if you can, obviously pay them all off down to zero, or leave a very small balance of $20, $25 on the card. That's going to give you your optimal credit score. So a lot of times when people are, really interested in getting a house, they need to start planning quite a bit, beforehand, to make sure that they're paying down all their balances, keeping them low, so that their credit score looks the best it can look. One thing that's now entering the world is what's called trended data. And what happened is, you used to be able to just pay down all your credit cards instantly, and then you would have that immediate reflection. But over time, what's happening is the models are starting to back in 24 months worth of data, so that they're going to look back and see, oh, have you been revolving for 24 months, or have you paid it all off every single month for 24 months? And why that's important is, again, if someone's trying to buy a house or a big ticket item, you want to start as early in the process as possible, getting that below 30% or paid off completely, so that the model will start picking up that you're not a revolver, you're actually paying your balances every single month. Credit history. So this is how long you've had your accounts. Now, what's interesting about the way all this works is that once you get a card, or any account really, what happens, a little counter starts on the trade line, and it starts at 0 and starts counting up 1, 2, 3, once for each month that it's being used and active. It'll go all the way up to 99, and then it stops counting. So what happens is the model loves older accounts that sit at 99. It does not like accounts 0 to 6, meaning they're brand new, they haven't been proven, the borrower may or may not be able to pay these. So what happens is, a lot of times people will get a new card, and they'll take a hit on their credit score just until that account seasons and gets over 6 months. So one thing you want to be careful of is, we have people that we see all the time that may have, these really good credit cards with 70, 80, 90 months worth of history, and they may get mad at the credit card company because of a fee or whatever, a late charge or whatever. And they say, I'm going to close this, I'm going to get another one. Well, they end up closing those older ones that are really establishing good credit history, and they go get a brand new one that's a 1 or 2 months old, and the model it doesn't know the backstory. All it does is it drops the credit score. So you want to be very careful about closing older cards, opening new ones. You want to be very strategic about it. And also, if you do get a new card, you want to make sure you're using it. If you just use it one time, pay it off, and never use it again, then sometimes that can just stay at 1 or 2 months and it never properly seasons. You want to make sure that you're going in once a month on all your accounts. It doesn't matter. It can be a tank of gas, a Starbucks coffee, whatever, just one item, just to make sure it's being used once a month. Use it, pay it off, use it, pay it off, and do that so that you keep all your accounts active and you keep them all aging properly. One other thing on the credit history, when are you actually late? And this is a question we get a lot. Sometimes someone will say, I don't understand. I thought my payment was due on, August 1st, but I was late. And so I just kind of forgot about it, and I'll just deal with it in September. Well, that's not what you want to do. When a payment is due on August 1st, then immediately, if you don't pay it, the credit card company can do some things. They can charge you a late fee. They can send you nasty grams. They can do all that. But that doesn't matter in the eyes of the bureaus and the Fair Credit Reporting Act. You cannot be legally deemed late until it's been a full 30 days after the actual due date. So a lot of times, again, people get that late fee on the 5th or the 8th of August here in this example, and they're like, oh, let me just worry about this in September because I'm already late and I got to pay another $35, whatever the case may be. But don't do that. Just settle, tell the credit card company, hey, let me just make the payment, make the minimum payment, get it going, pay the fee, the late fee, and then what you've done is you've saved your credit. You can still deal with the internal late with them. That's not an issue, but you've saved yourself from having that 1 times 30 on your credit report. So very, very important to understand how that works, because we see it all the time. And it's really sad too when somebody has a really good credit history, they're trying to buy a house, and one stupid late payment on like a $30 payment ends up derailing the whole thing. And we see it happen. And that's why one of my things is I always want to make sure I drill that in so people understand how important that is. Type of credit and use. This is 10%. And basically this is, all your mortgages will be fine. Most car loans will be fine. Student loans are fine, but you got to be careful with finance companies. The models do not like finance companies. And a finance company can be identified as a place you go where you can only use that line of credit at that particular store. So it's common with maybe home electronics, furniture, those types of things. So you typically just want to apply for credit cards and credit where you can take that Visa anywhere, go to any store and use it. That's really what you want to focus on. Stay away from the finance companies because, again, the models just really don't like those. And they typically have a higher interest rate, and there are other issues that go along with that too. So inquiries, 10% for this. Now, this is how often you're going out and actively seeking a hard inquiry. Now, again, the soft inquiries don't count at all here. This is only for hard inquiries. And what happened was, years ago when credit scoring first came out, it was a very famous case where somebody went to an auto dealership and they started off in the morning at, let's just say, the Ford dealer, and then they went to Honda, Toyota, Kia, and by the end of the day, they ended up at the Hyundai dealer to buy their car, but their score had just continually gone down just because they were shopping around. So what happened was the model was corrected so that you can allow consumers a period of time to shop around. And what this does is this says, hey, you can go have your credit report pulled one time or a million times. It basically stops counting after the first one. But as long as the inquiries are made within 45 days. So if you're going to go shopping around, you want to make sure you do it in a concise time frame. Different models, some of them will go 14 days, some of them 45, some of them 30. So you want to kind of just think 45 right now. Those are the new models in the mortgage space that are going to be 45 days. So again, August 1st, you pull your credit. By September 15th at the latest, you want to make sure you've done all your shopping with other creditors pulling your credit report. So otherwise, if you fall outside of that and you decide, hey, at the end of September, I'm going to go do it again, you're going to take another hit. And again, 50 to 60 points are available for inquiries. So one of the questions I always get is, well, how much is an actual inquiry? It's going to depend on the credit file. If you're somebody that's maybe, just a couple years out of school and you only have 2 credit cards, that inquiry for that consumer may be 10 points. Whereas if you have somebody that's been in the credit world for 40 years and had mortgages paid off and credit cards and they're perfect, 800 credit score, it may only be 4 or 5 points for them. So the amount of the inquiry really depends on the credit file. And then also if there are other derogatories and stuff like that baked into the model. So there's really no way you can say exactly, but you can kind of give a good range, and you want to make sure that you're staying in that 45 days to maximize your category here. So the tips, what you want to try to do is make sure that all your credit cards are paid down below 30%. You don't want to close any accounts unless someone's looked at your file and advised you that it's okay to do that. And you also want to be careful about consolidating debt because when we talked earlier about the credit cards, it does 2 things. Number one, those ratios, if you put all your debt on one card, even if it's 0%, your ratio is going to be so high because that card's going to be pretty much maxed out that you're going to take a hit for that. So you want to be strategic about that. Now, again, if you don't care and you're not going to buy anything in the next couple of years, then it's fine probably to do that. But a lot of this is designed for somebody that wants to buy a house or a car or apply for credit at some time in the next year or two. So it's very, very important, not to do that, not to load everything up on one card. Okay. Again, you want to review all your accounts for accuracy. So there's a couple different ways to do this. If you're working with a mortgage company, they're gonna really step in and kind of take over at that point and work with you on the credit file and make sure that you're doing all the right things to increase the credit score or deal with any issues. But if you're not going to buy a house, you have no intention of buying anything in the next 2 years, and you just want to go in and get a peek at your credit, annualcreditreport.com is a great place to go because the federal government mandates that each consumer have access to their credit file at each bureau. It used to be just once a year, but once COVID came, they opened that up, and now it's consumers, I think, can go in as much as they want, or at least once a month and get their free credit report and look at their data. The nice thing about annualcreditreport.com is you have a really nice mechanism to go right to the bureaus through a really cool reference number if there is a problem. You kind of do that on your own if you want to say, hey, wait a minute, this is being reported improperly. I wasn't late at this period of time, or whatever the case may be. You can actually have some empowerment there to go and use that their format to help get things corrected. The next thing is, always make payments on time. Anything that's past due, bring it current. Limit the number of credit cards that are maxed out or approaching, high credit, high utilization. And in this day and age, everything's so easy to set up for auto pay, where like every credit card you should just automatically have it set to make the minimum payment automatically every single month on the due date. That way, if you forget or you go on vacation or whatever the case may be, it's going to be done. And another thing here is avoiding initiated inquiries. That goes back to, if you are going to do that, make sure they're in a concise period of time so that you only get hit that one time for them and you don't get hit over and over again. So there were some changes that started in 2022 and then really ramped up last year. And I just want to make sure everybody knows these because they're really good for consumers. And that is medical collections. And what happened was, before these changes, which wasn't that long ago, we had cases where, somebody had a copay at a doctor's office for $30. And, the husband thought the wife was covering it and the wife thought the husband's insurance, whatever the case may be. And they just didn't pay like a $30 copay, and it hit the credit report. And what happened was it cost people their homes. I mean, seriously, people could not get a house because they had a collection from a medical collection. And what happened was they really realized, when I showed you that slide about the odds in good pay versus bad pay, well, they realized that, you know what? Just because someone doesn't pay a $30 medical bill, that does not translate to them not paying their mortgage or a car payment. So they really got smart with the data and said, you know what? We need to give the consumers a way to just get out of this medical problem stuff, because it's so rampant. And a lot of it, the consumers don't know what's going on until it's too late. And it's not really that easy to navigate through. Was it the hospital? Was it the doctor? We never heard of this collection company before. So it's great. What they did was they said, look, from now on, starting July 1st of 2022, any paid medical collection debt is going to be taken off the credit report. So it's gone. So it can't impact the credit score, not even going to be on the credit report. So that is fantastic. So if anybody out there, knows anybody that has medical debt, paying it gets it off the credit report right away. So then, so that was great, a great first step. But then what happened was they said, okay, let's take it a step further. So now any medical debt under $500, whether it's paid or not paid, comes off the credit report. So really now you have that. The only way you can have a medical collection problem is to have it over $500 and not pay it. So that's been a huge relief to a lot of consumers and really helped the situation out a lot. So now if you are in that situation where it is over 500, then again, once you work through it and agree and it's showed as paid, then it's going to automatically come off your credit report. And a lot of times you can work with those collection companies and make sure that they get satisfied or settled or whatever the case may be. So that was really, really good news. So the next thing is with new scoring models. So we've got 2 new scoring models coming in 2025. Excuse me, just want to get a little water there. And they're called the FICO 10T and the Vantage 4.0. And the reason why it's so important to know about these 2 models is because they're going to allow you as a consumer to do some things to help your credit that we haven't talked about. The first thing that's important about this is that FHFA, which that's the body that governs Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, all the GSEs for VA loans, FHA loans, they have approved these. So as we roll into next year, your lenders will be able to use these scores. And what's great about these scores is that they allow what's called self-reported items. And so right now, the mortgage industry doesn't ignore self-reported items, but starting next year, you'll be allowed to benefit from this. And what that means is if you don't have a lot of credit, and there are people that they don't want to get sucked into credit card debt and all that, so they pay cash for everything. And then when they decide they want to go buy a house, they don't generate a credit score, so the lender has a hard time giving them a loan, and it creates a lot of problems. Well, this is going to allow a consumer to go in and say, hey, you know what? I pay my rent, I pay my utilities, pay my phone bill every month, I pay my electric bill. So I want credit for that. So you'll be able to go in and apply. When it's a really easy process. It's Experian Boost, run by Experian, is a really neat mechanism to go in and give this a try, where you go in and you upload your data and say, hey, here's, I've had 12 months of electric bills or whatever the case may be. And then what they do is they then authenticate it and then they put it on your credit report, and that will help your credit score. So it's fantastic, and it's very important for everybody to know about that. And the best part about it is, right now, some models do, some companies do use it for like credit cards and car loans. But wow, once the mortgage industry start using it, it's going to be a game changer, because a lot of people that have been kind of pushed out right now because they pay cash for everything, they're going to be able to be brought right back in, demonstrate a good credit score and get a loan. So that's very, very important to start doing that now. And there'll be a period of time where lenders will use both scores. So what will happen is if you are self-reporting and you're using the newer scores, then that's going to benefit you. So the lender will probably gravitate toward using that one. Of course, if your older ones are higher, they're going to use those too, but they'll be able to use both for a little while. Another thing I want to talk about is kind of interesting in the industry, what's called trigger leads. So when your consumer file is your information, but the bureaus sell that information. And a lot of times, like, you may look at your mailbox, and if you get credit card offers, you may get offered different types of programs, and you kind of tell, hey, if I'm offered a high credit limit gold card, and that means I'm probably a pretty high credit score. If I'm being offered debt consolidation loans, then maybe my credit score is not as high. So you can kind of tell from your mailbox offers where you kind of stand credit wise. So this is how they do that. They sell the information. They sell it off in inquiries. They sell it off their database. So it can be very confusing for borrowers. So I just wanted to let you know, if something like this happens, it's not that my company or your mortgage company is doing it. It's actually coming from the bureau level. So just by knowing that, you kind of say, oh, okay, yeah, I understand where all these offers are coming from. And it's also important to know it's not, they have like what your credit score is and a general picture of you, but they're not getting they're not giving away all your real information, like your social security number, date of birth, and stuff like that. So when you get those offers in the mail, it's somewhat generic in that they really don't know all your information, but they just know that you fit into a certain bucket, like your credit score is over 750 or under 680, wherever the case may be. So just wanted to kind of give you a little education on how that works. So there is a way to opt out of this if you don't want to participate in these leads, unsolicited offers, and that is you can opt out. At the end of this presentation, I'll give you the information on how you can actually opt out. And then what that does is now you're taken completely out of pre-screened offers. You won't get those unwanted solicitations anymore. And a lot of consumers are really happy with that. And there has been some legislation in Congress to try to curtail how that whole process works. It's, there's a bill in the House, there's a bill in the Senate, and it's working its way through. But this time it's getting some steam, and we have like the Mortgage Bankers Association and some other trade groups that are really putting their weight behind it. So we'll see what happens. You may see some stuff in the news later on this year about changes to all that, and it's very interesting to follow that. And that's this is just more about that. Here's the opt out that I told you about. So if you want to opt out of pre-screen offers, you can go onto the website www.optoutprescreen.com, or you can call the 888 number, and then this takes you off the marketing list, cuts down on your junk mail, can help prevent identity theft, and then just kind of give you a little bit more peace of mind there with everything. And then the other resource I have is the annualcreditreport.com that I mentioned earlier, where you can go once a year not now, you can go as much as you want, but it used to be once a year and get your free consumer copy of the credit report. So those are just some of the highlights that I wanted to touch on. Just really important to get that information in front of you so and you can make good choices with your credit.